Hi, this is Garry Momber of the Maritime Archaeology Trust. We're an organisation that looks at the underwater cultural heritage to try and raise information, research it, learn about it, and then share it and disseminate it as widely as possible. It's not just about shipwrecks and drowned landscapes. It's about the people in the past. It's laying the foundations for who we are. And we want to get that information and integrate it back into society, and so that we can be in a place where we can learn from our past. And we're a charity. And our role is really to go out there and deal with matters that aren't dealt with by the rest of society, because they're not part of a statutory framework. There's no money, no supplies for them. Yet we're dealing with a resource, information that's being lost in front of our eyes all the time. And once it's lost forever. Now, saying that, on a happier note, let's come back to the talks. What we're doing today is we're going to be presenting talks on how we visualize and how we see and how we get the information from the seabed, so most people can see it. Now, from your perspective, this is the first time we've given a talk like this, as you can probably tell, for the first time in 30 years. Prior to this annual lecture series was just held after our AGMs each year to a limited audience. Now the whole world can see it. So the conversations will be, or the conversations and discussions that we'll have at the end, will reflect on the talks that we'll give. That will be about the D-Day wall, there'll be about submerged landscapes, there'll be about shipwrecks, there'll be about dissemination and inclusion, and about our heritage centre on the Isle of Wight as well. So I entreat you to sit down, relax for the next couple of hours and work through these talks as much as you like. If you can't see the talks today, you can come back and see them again on Facebook next week. But before I go, I want to be thanking all our volunteers and all our sponsors and all the people that have supported us for the last 30 years that have made this possible. I hope we can tell you something new, and I hope we can tell you something special. On that note, I'll hand over now to Brandon Mason, who's going to talk more about the wonderful tools we use for visualization.
Hello everyone, Brandon here, coming to you live from the spare bedroom. I'm a maritime archaeologist with the MAT, working mostly on offshore wind projects, but also on a range of research and database development work across the organisation. But my main passion is the visualization and recording of hard-to-reach archaeological sites, and bringing these finds and places into the conscience of as many people as possible. Now, many of those people would never dream of putting themselves through the bother and expense of visiting these depths or far-flung places in the flesh, while others would relish the chance, but might not have the opportunity. I know that I'm extremely privileged to do the work that I do, and so whatever your thoughts on the matter, I hope I can share with you today a taste of our underwater work over the last 12 months, and show how we're trying to squeeze the most value out of every dive we undertake. So 3 sites to show you today out of a much reduced selection from the last 12 months in comparison to previous years. While we've missed out on some of the further flung destinations, we've still undertaken some really good fieldwork on sites closer to home. We'll be going some way offshore to explore the enigmatic wreck of a 19th century schooner and her unusual cargo in the image on the left. We'll also be squeezing in a bit of foreign travel from late last year with news from the Mortella excavations in Corsica, that's the centre image. But first up are the Chesil Beach protected wrecks, where we've been working with the Nautical Archaeology Society and Historic England, training a new and local team of site custodians. So leaving our offices at the National Oceanography Centre in Southampton that you see before you, we're off to Chesil Beach in Dorset, just a short hop over to the next county, across the New Forest, and zooming in here with a view over Weymouth and Portland Harbour and the Isle of Portland off to the right. Looking east, of course, we can see the 2 sites that comprise the Chesil Beach protected wreck sites, the inner being not many tens of metres from the shore, really close in and quite hard to get to in any sort of weather, and the outer site being 220 metres further to the south than the inner site. Our colleagues at the Nautical Archaeology Society have created a fantastic video that we've been using in our maritime bus to give a bit of a background and explainer to the site. So I'm going to take the liberty of showing you that now. What are the Chesil Beach wrecks? Sites 1 and 2 represent 2 clusters of cannons just off Chesil Beach. Despite being discovered in 2010, their identity still remains a mystery. Site 1. Chesil Beach Site 1 lies just offshore and consists of 8 large cast iron muzzle loading cannons and a concentration of archaeological material. Can you spot the cannons? Of course you can. This really nice interpretation was done by Wessex Archaeology when they investigated the site in 2015. It dates to the late 17th or early 18th century and lies in 11 metres of water. The guns are 24 to 32 pounders and are larger than would be expected for privateers or merchant ships, so they may be naval or land guns instead. Chesil Beach Site 2 lies approximately 220 metres to the south of Site 1 and slightly further offshore. 7 cast iron cannons lie on the seabed but without any accompanying archaeological material identified to date. And that's the interpretation of those guns. Take a note of the top middle one, we'll come back to that later. Not clear if the guns were cargo or armament, but the presence of possible iron shots still in the mouth of one suggests it was ready. It's likely that the site represents a wreck, which, with evidence from the cannons, appear to date to the 17th century. Why are the wrecks at risk? I'll give you a clue, it's not his fault. As well as being home to many species of fish and plants, the wrecks slowly erode naturally with the tide. They were also the target of thieves in the 1970s, who used dynamite to try and find treasure. The Chesil Beach wrecks have been protected under the Protection of Wrecks Act 1973. This allows the designation of a restricted area around the wrecks to prevent the uncontrolled interference. What is the Chesil Beach Wrecks Project? You may well ask. It's a joint initiative between the NAS, the MAT and Historic England to explore 2 protected wrecks off the coast of Chesil Beach. The project's working with local divers to help develop recording skills to use on the site. With practice in underwater surveying techniques, recording cannons and in photogrammetry, these newly trained archaeological divers will form a local team who will continue to investigate and protect the wrecks throughout the project and beyond. Armed with their new abilities and know-how, we had a window of weather opportunity to visit the inner cannon site late last year. Now this site's really close inshore, and when the waves are crashing on Chesil Beach, to any degree really, it's very difficult for a vessel to get close in, deposit divers and pick them up safely again. But we did have some wonderful conditions on this occasion, and the team were able to practice all of their recording skills, setting out tapes, getting key diagnostic measurements, laying out the scales for photogrammetry recording, while the MAT divers were able to proceed with gathering hundreds and hundreds of photos within a relatively short time scale, getting in and working between the divers to capture again as many images as possible. These photos have been post-processed and kind of give you an idea that we're in the balmy Mediterranean, but actually this is more realistic of what it was like to be on the site at the time. And when you see the video you might think that doesn't look quite so easy to work in. Actually this is pretty good. There's plenty of range, about 3 or 4 meters visibility, and it's enough to work and gather a lot of images at close range which can then be overlapped to create a photogrammetric model. So what you see are the iron guns around the periphery. There's actually a lot more sediment than there was in the 2015 survey done by Wessex Archaeology. So a lot of the guns are quite covered up. You can just see in the lower left there's one cascabel end of one of the guns poking out through the sand. But the main feature of the site are these incredible concretions, stacked, absolutely stacked, with tons and tons of cannonballs, and also in the closest part of the image at the moment you can see lots of broken elements of guns in pieces really, and why this might be is not entirely clear. Perhaps these are not guns in service, perhaps just ballast being transported with other ballast material that's now concreted together, or is this evidence of human interference? Of dynamiting from the 1970s, which is reported to have happened on this site, and this is some of the debris. Certainly large concretion at the back there with the cannonball poking out certainly seems to have been split asunder in two, and human interference on the site clearly continues, as we see just coming around in the concretion closest to you, an anchor resting in, and some what's probably trawl board wedged itself in the gaps there. But as we all know, in 2020 everything changed, and so for recording the outer site, unfortunately gone were the enthusiastic team of participants and volunteer divers, and we were left with some very odd socially distanced MAT divers and NAS supervisors keeping everything on track. So we managed to record all of the guns that we were expecting. 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 butted up against each other. 6 off over here, and hang on, what's that one doing there? That's not supposed to be there. I don't know if you remember from the previous video introduction, we had a cannon that was in the center of the site, cannon 2014, which is now 10 meters further to the north than it's supposed to be. Some commiseration, we've got an extra cannon. So instead of 7 cannons on the Chesil outer site, site 2, we've actually got 8 now, albeit with one of them having gone a little bit walkies. Here's a perspective view of the location where 2014 used to be situated, in a scour pit indicated by the dotted red line, a nice little scour trough infilled with fine sediment, suggesting that it has not been long removed. This really hasn't backfilled a great deal, and what it is filled with is very different from the surrounding context. Travelled a full 10 metres and hopped slightly over the cascabel of the adjacent gun to find itself in its current location. But the question is, how did that happen and why? Was it divers lifting it carefully? There doesn't seem to be much drag marks or indication of something having bumped across the seabed. Or, as this is parallel with the beach, is this a trawler operating very far inshore? But one thing's for certain, it didn't get there by itself. So this is a digital terrain model, or DTM, which is derived from the same photogrammetry data, lots and lots of overlapping images, that were used to create the 3D model that we saw in the previous slides. And this is a nice view of the data because it gives us a slightly different understanding of what's going on. So elevation and changes in height are shown in a false color map, with red being the shallowest areas and blue being the deepest areas of the topography. So straight away we can see that gun 2014 stands out. It's not nearly as embedded in the seabed as the other guns, although we can see a gradual shift from green to blue as the beach is shelving down from that side anyway. So that's pretty much parallel to the shore as Chesil Beach winds away from northwest to southeast. But what we can see around each of the individual guns, particularly those that are lying more across the tide, some nice scour areas. So all of the guns are depicted in green, apart from those 2 up there. And next to them, generally, you can pick out blue areas where erosion is happening as water accelerates around the blocking objects and creates vortices which gradually remove the sediment and create scour pits and scour effects. And they're more pronounced depending on the type of sediment and the orientation of that object across the tide. So straight away we can start to understand what's actually going on with these sites. Where are the areas that are most prone to change, or most vulnerable, most exposed, especially when we start to compare that with previous data sets. And that will be the next step for these data sets and these sites, is to start to bring together all of the data and present that within a 3D viewer that will be hosted online and will be publicly accessible. And that should be available by the early part of next year, once we've got a lot further with the analysis and comparison with previous survey. So that's an exciting development to come, and it's one of the deliverables of this project. So we look forward to sharing that with you in due course. Okay, moving swiftly on from the Chesil Beach shipwrecks. Next, we're off to a remarkable shipwreck that we've been investigating following the hard work and dedication of one of our most treasured artefacts in his own right. Dave Wenders is the skipper of our regular charter vessel, Wight Spirit. He's been diving for decades and has amassed a wealth of experience which he's documented in 2 volumes of South Coast shipwrecks off the East Dorset and Wight, both full of shipwreck lore and stories of heroism and tragedy. One story that had him intrigued for several years was reports of a wreck carrying what appeared to be steam train components, what the ROV operator related to Dave as the train set. But the position given was in the old Decker system, and transforming the coordinates proved to be challenging. But while diving and investigating anomalies south of the Isle of Wight with a crack team in 2004, the divers returned to the surface reported large wheels, a lot of brass, and recovered an unusual nameplate. Further archival research undertaken by Dave revealed that this was not the nameplate of a vessel, but from a steam train. The fabled train set had been found. Pretty soon, Dave had a name, and shortly after, the full narrative of the loss of this vessel. Built by Canada Works Birkenhead, the cargo of 2 steam trains and 3 tenders was on its way from Southampton to Denmark in February 1865 aboard the 25-metre-long, 115-ton coastal schooner Brackenholm, itself built in Gaul in 1857. This image shows a Canada Works locomotive from the 1860s, similar to the type lost in 1865. South of St Catherine's Point, Brackenholm encountered the British naval vessel Supply of 638 tons. Observing the collision rules, and while desperately signalling to the naval vessel, Brackenholm held her course until it was too late. Supply crashed into the wooden schooner in the bows, quickly sending the ship and her cargo to the bottom. Fortunately, the crew were able to scramble forward and onto the bows of the naval vessel before their own was lost. Dave asked the MAT to undertake a 3D survey in late 2019. The wreck lies in 37 metres, and in 2019 it was very dark with only a metre or so visibility. In September 2020 we tried once again to get a clearer view of the wreck, but on this occasion it was even darker with visibility less than 1 metre for the most part. These images give you a sense of the wreck and the extent of our field of view on site, even with some of the best underwater lighting available thanks to Walkerlight. In the top left we can see some of the train wheels and axles, of which at least 10 sets have been identified so far. Top right image shows you divers floodlighting the gloom. In the bottom right we can see a section of exposed keel or keelson element and other wooden framing, which demonstrates that a significant part of this vessel is preserved below the cargo dunnage and seabed level. In the bottom left, free-swimming congers festoon this site in abundance. And they're very bold. This one came right up to the dome port and bumped on the glass, much closer than he appears due to the wide-angle lens. So despite some biological interference and challenging environmental conditions, we were still able to piece together a little bit of an orthomosaic of this site and get some 3D imagery out of the otherwise quite snowy photographs. What we have here is a top-down view of the wreck showing approximately 15, almost 20 meters in length. The main part is the cargo, of course, where you can see the axles and wheels stacked up, at least 10 pairs in there. Well, actually 9.5 pairs identified so far, and they're sitting on top of the chassis of what would have been the main chassis of the locomotives. To the right, in the lower right, you can see the boiler tubes that would have been heated inside the classic boiler that sits on top of the steam engine, with the funnels lying adjacent nearby, and the end plates making up the main components of the steam locomotives themselves. No sign of the tenders, and that's probably because of what we see to the lower left at the other end of the image, which is a lot of trawl net. And that appears to be snagged on some sort of metal framing, perhaps gunwale, although this is a wooden ship, but it looks like we've got what could be the bow area up at this end of the vessel, extending quite far away. So a lot of material buried under the sand, and a really exciting site with a lot to tell. This is what the steam trains on the seabed would probably have looked like. This is one of the only surviving examples of a Canada Works steam train from the 1870s, I believe, and it's now in Romania, of all places. So if you're a real steam engine buff, this might be on your destination once international travel is possible once again. What's clear from this work so far is that the site is both unique and under threat. We plan to return early next year with Dave, with a key aim being to set these features within the wider seabed context and understand how much of the original ship survives, while also involving experts from the world of steam locomotives to establish the significance of these long-forgotten examples of British steam power. Our last stop is a brief introduction to the work we've been collaborating on in Galicia in northwestern Spain, and more recently in San Florent Bay in Corsica, studying and recording Iberian and Mediterranean shipwrecks with our partners CIAN, Archaeonautica, University Trinity St. David's, and Texas A&M Nautical Archaeology Department. Mortilla 3 is located in San Florent Bay in stunning surroundings. Mortilla 2 and 3 are early 16th century Italian vessels that were burnt at anchor in San Florent Bay when caught by surprise by their enemies. They lie in 40 and 47 metres and consist of the lower hulls of two vessels built in the Mediterranean tradition of carvel planking, with iron stave-built guns and formidable anchors over 4 metres in length, attesting to the size of these ships. The sites take their name from the Mortella Tower, a name which in Italian means myrtle, which grows on the island and at Myrtle Point where the tower is located. Nelson was so impressed with its construction that he spent a great deal of time trying to blow it up, and then imported the idea of what are now known as Martello Towers across the former British Empire. Is the team led by Dr. Arnaud Casanave de la Roche, with participants from across Europe, and the diving and research vessel Usalesia. Our roles were to undertake excavation and 3D recording for the project. The main objective was to examine and record the keel and to understand the general construction in relation to other early Mediterranean examples, as well as a comparison with Iberian vessels being constructed by Genoese shipbuilders that are being considered within related programs. Christin made this wonderful video that gives a really good flavour of the site. So much to talk about with all of these sites that we've looked at today, but so little time, and I just wanted to touch on plans for getting all of these results out in the public domain with the greatest level of impact. We've been returning to some of the data sets that we captured as part of the Forgotten Wrecks project several years ago, and starting to reprocess these and see what kind of results we could actually get out with more modern computing power and software developments. And actually there's a lot we can do to tell the stories of these sites and create immersive environments. And this is just a short capture from work undertaken by our colleagues at Trinity St. David's when they were looking at including SS Gallia, a 1917 First World War vessel, within a sort of game engine environment, and just what you can achieve when you start to look at incorporating developments in software, in gaming, in film and television, and bring these kind of things that we're recording into those scenes. And just a very quick introduction into the type of impact that this work can have when bringing 3D assets, retopologizing, reprocessing, and setting these within immersive environments. So this is a VR environment you could put on your headset and swim virtually around, or you can use your game controller and really start to explore these up close and personal. And this kind of experience is what we want to generate with pretty much all of the 3D models and assets we've talked about today. Not content with just putting a model on a web page and letting people spin it round in circles, but actually take our public and our audience down to the sites to maximize impact, to really get an understanding of this material as it exists on the seabed. And that's not just for outreach, that's for collaboration. In these times when travel is so difficult, being able to virtually dive on a shipwreck site to discuss, to plan, and to interpret, well, this is fantastic. These are wonderful tools that are facilitating that kind of dialogue and exciting developments for the future. So without further ado, it only remains for me to thank Peter and Mark and all the team at the NAS, Dave Wendes, Historic England, Arnaud Casanave de la Roche, and all the team that are currently working in Ribadeo, Galicia. We miss you. And thank you for listening.
This is Garry Momber. My talk is The Prehistoric World Beneath the Waves. Before I begin, I'll warn you that I'm not very proficient at this new method of presentation, where I have nothing but a screen to look at. So please bear with me as I work with the technology and give the talk as if it was to a live audience. First, we should consider why archaeological sites exist within submerged landscapes. This was because sea level was up to 130 metres lower during the last ice age, or even 140 metres, and this exposed a lot of the continental shelf. As the climate warmed, the ice began to melt, allowing plants and animals to move north. These were followed by people, and then, as millennia passed, the glaciers melted further, and the sea level rose behind them. The rising waters covered the landscape, but in doing so, it eroded the high spots and filled in the valleys and river channels, should I say, with the sediment. This sediment covered these old landscapes and protected them in oxygen-free environments. And today I'm going to look at one such environment, which is the Western Solent. That's the blue area in the middle of the screen, with the Isle of Wight to the south and mainland England to the north. 8,000 years ago, the Western Solent was an ice-sheltered river valley, and it was just seeing the ingress of the sea, which came in to form an estuary. And the estuary developed for the next 5,000 years, and sediments were dropped and deposited all over the land surface. Then about 3,000 years ago, the western end by Hurstspit broke through, and that formed the Solent Seaway. And with that, the tides were going backwards and forwards, and they slowly started to excavate and get rid of all those sediments that were laid in the first place. However, some of those sediments do remain, and they remain around the fringes of the Solent. Here at Lymington, you can see quite extensive mudflats at low water, and those mudflats are sitting on top of old land surfaces that are made up of peat inlaid with trees, and you can actually see those further offshore where the mudflats have eroded away and the landscapes are exposed in about 4 meters of water. These are about sort of 5,000–6,000 years old. But further to the east, a lot of that covering the mudflat deposit has been eroded away and we're down to the bedrock. But within that bedrock, we still do find pockets of paleo-environmental material and paleo channels, and some of these have archaeological material remaining within them. One such site were these lines of posts at Calshot that were discovered following storms a few years ago. These run parallel to the shore, down at the low water mark, sort of where you can just about see on the right hand side. Now these aren't very substantive, and we thought they might be associated with fishing, but we dated them and they came back at Romano-Celtic, between 40 BC and 140 AD. Now, interestingly, not only do they tell us about Roman occupation along the northwest Solent, but they also tell you about the nature of the landscape, because for these to have survived when the sea level was 3 or 4 meters higher than above the sites would be very unlikely if they were stuck in open water. So invariably they would have been within mudflats or marshes, which must have stretched much further into the Solent at the time. The one good thing about the high water on them at the moment is that we can use that to work on them, and we can do diving archaeology on the site, as we did to excavate some of the posts. Working underwater, we removed the silt to reveal nicely preserved timbers along the edge of the causeway. These included the large ones, which date around 148 AD, but we also saw older ones much lower down. These ones here show that there's different stages of development within the causeway itself. We were also very impressed by the levels of conservation. You can see on these posts cut marks, very fresh, almost as if they were done last year, being conserved within those oxygen-free sediments. But these weren't the only ones. Just 10 meters away, a bit further seaward, we found a bunch of other structures. We thought they were all associated, but these were a bit more complicated. We investigated further and we discovered these posts of a different character. Again, also with very nice fine cut marks on them, slightly different cut marks than the earlier ones. They were dated, and the dates came back at 1370 BC. So what we have here is a Bronze Age complex as well as Roman. The site was recorded using photogrammetry. These were hundreds of photographs that we stitched together. We found this the most effective way to get a record of the whole site, and this was done underwater. And you can see from it, which is a green strip in the background of this picture, you can see on the right hand side is the east, and then at the top left is sort of the west, southwest. You can see that it stretches, in fact, it stretches for about 60 70 meters between the causeway and the Bronze Age structures at the end. So it was a very complicated area, an area that was revisited for at least 1500 years. So it must have been a significant site between the Bronze Age and the Roman periods. And it's interesting because the further you go down the beach, the further you tend to go back in time. And going back in time we will. Now I'm taking you to an intertidal forest that's exposed right at the low water mark, a bit further down the northwest Solent. Here we have a bunch of trees that dated to about 5,200 years old from the Neolithic period. And they would have all fallen and toppled as sea level came in and poisoned their roots, so they're a direct reflection of sea level rise at the time. This landscape was associated with a paleo channel, and on the other side of the channel, the old waterway, we found these interesting posts, a line of about 6 or 7 posts. We've seen one of them here. This was recovered a year or so ago, and you can see cut marks on it. It's been trimmed and cut, and it's covered in a resin, and the resin seems to be impregnated with stones. It looks like they were protecting those bits of timber, maybe from the encroaching sea. They date about 5,100 years old, so it looks like the sea was around at the time. So here we have some wonderful indications, not only an index point to show us where sea level was at the time, but also to show how people were adapting to sea level change in the Neolithic. To survey the site, we used a drone survey with the same principle as working underwater, to take thousands of photographs which can then be stitched together to create a geo-reference plan. To investigate the underwater paleo channel, we ran a bunch of cores from east to west across the whole area to see if we could pick up on some of the underlying substrates to work out what was happening beneath the silt and sediment. This enabled us to produce a digital terrain model, and within it we've annotated the areas where there's archaeology and peat deposits associated with the paleo environmental landscape. On the right hand side you can see all those stars. They represent wooden posts that were found within the peat area. The peat area is defined by the oval shapes. Between the peat we had the paleo channel, the sediment associated with the channel running down, which goes from north to south into the Solent. And further to the left we found another bunch of posts, wooden posts. Anomalous, these pushed straight down into the underlying geological clays. So it's a complicated site, currently covered with a big gravel bank in the middle, but the things of interest in particular are the archaeological artifacts. The most recent discovery is what appears to be the base of a fishing basket. Now this is only really exposed at the low water mark right at the bottom of the tide. These are a bunch of posts coming out of the seabed, and they're surrounded by wattle which ties them together. So, one could place a fish or crustacea inside it to preserve it. Now, for this to be effective, there needs to be water. So it's probably later than the Neolithic, although it's the same level on the coastline. It probably dates maybe to the Bronze Age or even later to the Saxon. We've taken some cores from the site, which we'll analyze pollen and diatoms within it, and we've also put out a sample for dating. When that information comes through and we got a better idea of what we're dealing with, we'll go back to it at another low water spring tide and see if we can conduct some meaningful excavation. But as the mudflats erode away from all of the northwest Solent, more and more of these artifacts are going to be discovered. They've been very well preserved for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but now they're found, they will be lost. They'll be lost, and all the knowledge that goes with them will be lost. And also, they're direct indication of erosion on the coastline, so they have a secondary value as well. But now I'm going to move from the northwest Solent to another area where there's ongoing erosion on the coastline and underwater. This is Boldner Hill, the bottom of which is being eroded away by the Solent to form a cliff, and you can see on the beach below a whole line of trees that are lying down and they got embedded in the shingle. Underwater we have another cliff. This is a product of different formation processes, but it looks similar. The top area where it's fairly white, it's about 4 meters of water. It then drops down to below those little vertical cliffs to about 11 meters of water, and then you have a long green bench, which is similar to the beach on the surface, but this is in fact a bench inlaid with trees, but it's made of peat. It's part of the old land surface, and it's the bit that's sticking out from underneath those relic mudflat sediments on the left, and on the right we have a small cliff that's been eroded away and continually being destroyed as the Solent grows. Diving underwater to the bottom of the cliff, we come to the remains of that old submerged forest. At the top of the picture, we can see an old oak tree that's falling down, and it's still got its bark on it. On the left, the dark area is the peat deposit that's being eroded away, and in the middle is a nice excavating lobster that's worked its way into the peat and the sand below. That excavating lobster recovered worked flints for the first time discovered in UK waters about 20 years ago. Following the initial discovery by the lobster, we've been going back every year to try and rescue and recover artifacts as the cliff erodes behind them. What we found are hundreds of worked flint tools. These all date to the Mesolithic. This is 8,000 years ago, and we know that first typologically, but also because we've dated a lot of the organic material. The worked pieces themselves are made of a fine dark flint. A lot of it you can find coming out the cliffs that cut across the Isle of Wight and at the Needles. On the left we have a selection of different cores being recovered, and on the right we have flakes that have been turned into sort of bladelets, blades and scrapers. We found hundreds of these artifacts just eroding from beneath the cliff. We also found tools, and here we have an adze. We found a couple of other pieces of adze as well, but this is a whole one. It would have been hafted, and it was a tool that would have been used during the Mesolithic for trimming trees and maybe boat building. We also found hand tools, including this one on the right, that would have been used for sort of cutting or scraping or chopping. But what's been really significant about the area is the preservation of organic material, again from these anaerobic sediments that are oxygen free. These leaves, these oak leaves that were recovered from near that hand axe, look like they came up about last year from the forest, but like everything else, they are between 7,900 to 8,000 years old. The artifacts we're discovering are starting to give insights into the technology of these Mesolithic people. Here we have some string, the oldest piece of string yet discovered in the UK, and it was twisted and prepared using nettle. But an important role of the old woodland is to actually defend the woodland bench, we call it, from ongoing erosion. And what we can see, these root systems here with some trees, and they're right on the shelf that's being eroded away, but they're protecting it, and they're acting, you could say, as sentinels against the ongoing abrasion from the Solent. That tree I just showed you comes from about 400 meters away from where the lobster did the initial excavation. It's a site called BC5. And this is very important because rather than lots of flint tools, we're finding lots of worked wood and woodworking activity. Here we have another one of those nice 3D models. This one about 800 photographs stitched together, but it shows you the edge that's eroding away. These strong pointy bits are that's sort of sticking out, these promontories, small promontories, are effectively the remains of root systems holding back the erosion. Meanwhile, within the embayments, we're finding archaeological material being exposed as that peat deposit recedes. When we look at an annotated image of that 3D model, we can see where some of that archaeological material is coming from. And at the bottom, you can see where the area has been eroded, that drops deeper into the solent. A whole series of posts have been recovered. And of particular interest to us are these platforms. And just in the middle on the right, there's what appeared to be a platform laid on the seabed that started to be exposed, and we've since recovered it, started to be exposed as that peat was removed from it. These wooden platforms, as we call them, were a series of timbers laid out in an organised fashion on the seabed. Individually, they were hard to tell from natural, but collectively they formed little structures. But they were flat on one side and round on another, which was fairly common with all of them. So we set about some experimental archaeology to see if we could work out how they were made. So, with the help of Exbury Gardens, who provided us with a large piece of oak trunk, we started to use traditional Mesolithic flints and tools to work on the tree to see if we could convert it and produce the offcuts that we found on the site. The first thing we discovered is that adzes weren't very effective when working with a hard oak tree, so we had to burn it. And to do that, we heated up flints similar to the ones that we'd found on the site and carbonized the wood, turning it to charcoal. Then we could remove it quite readily with flint. We also used antlers, and using the antlers, we could split the timber along the line of the bark and the sapwood, and by doing that, we would produce timbers about 30 to 50 centimeters long that were round on one side and flat on the other. And these were just the sorts of timbers we were discovering on our most recent find last year, when we had another platform of about 60 pieces of timber, many of which were round on one side and flat on the other. Here we have the base of the platform being reconstructed on the surface, but then when we add all the other pieces to the top of it, you can see it forms a bit of a well-organized matrix stretching 2 meters by 1 meter long. This is a significant site because, one, it links into the woodworking activities in the area, and also it happens to be the most cohesive 8,000-year-old Mesolithic structure that's been recovered to date in the UK. People that would like to see that more close up can visit it on our Sketchfab, Maritime Archaeology Sketchfab website, where you can look at it and you can spin it around and see it in all its 3D glory. For those that would like to see the collection of different models I've been showing today, you just need to go to sketchfab.com, Maritime Archaeology Trust models. You can see the address at the top of this slide. So returning to BC5 on the seabed, this area here is immediately to the east of the area I showed you earlier with the spinny around little video. What it shows you is the location of some of those platforms. WFO4 is a platform that we recovered. There's another one, WFO5. We noticed the tree stump in the middle that's eroding away and everything's receding. But an important area was WFO2 on the far right hand side of the image. This is right in the center of BC5, and it was an area that we excavated in 2007. WFO2 was an area where there was a lot of woodworking activity, many pieces of worked wood, lots of burnt flints and carbonized flints that have been reused, and central to it all was a large oak tree, the evidence of which we found within the plank that's still on site. This came from a tree that was about 2 meters wide and maybe 20 or 30 meters long. So what we have is a tree that was being trimmed and stripped and burnt and worked, just as we saw, to make these platforms around the region. It was invariably a Mesolithic logboat, making this the oldest boat building site in the world. But that wasn't all, because DNA was collected from sediment within the site. This identified a number of species of animal, rodents, geese, dog, auroch, a type of cow, and also a lot of the vegetation. And within that vegetation, there was einkorn, and einkorn's particularly significant because it was domesticated wheat, and that wasn't supposed to arrive to the UK for at least another 2,000 years. So it looks like the people that lived on this site were working with or connecting with people from further east in Europe and travelling back and forth. This is where their logbook would have come in handy, because Britain was still connected to Europe at the same time. The North Sea hadn't quite been formed, and there was connections up and down the river. So this site tells us so much about the individual people that lived there, but also how it's interconnected with the rest of Europe. I will finish with a reconstruction of the site where you can see a logboat being built there on the right. We can see the evidence of dog on the left, auroch in the background, and in the middle a nice little fire where it looks like there's some bread being baked after it's being made. So if you had some auroch meat thrown into that bread, you have a site also with the oldest beef burger in the world, but yet to be discovered. For those of you who are still with us, thank you very much for tolerating my lengthy talk about submerged landscapes and climate change and the threats to all that wonderful material. But now we're going to take a different tack, and we're going to listen to Helen Wallbridge, who's going to talk about the D-Day wall in Southampton. It's not just about the wall, but it's about the people who inscribed their names on it, the families of the people and the people themselves that went off to war on D-Day. This history, in many ways, is much more relevant to us today, and it tells a story that we can all equate with.
The D-Day Stories from the Wall project is funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. It began in April 2019 and will run until January 2021. The aim of the project is to create a digital recording of the 60-plus inscriptions left by American soldiers during World War II. The carvings can be found on a brick wall in Western Esplanade, close to the embarkation hards. This project seeks to tell the stories of these men and raise awareness of Southampton's World War II heritage. On D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, British and Canadian troops embarked from Southampton and locations under its command to beaches codenamed Gold, Juno and Sword on the Normandy coast. The initial American invasion force sailed from the West Country, but in the days following through until the end of the war, more than 2 million replacement American troops sailed from Southampton to Normandy. In this photo you can see the impromptu ceremony that was held as the millionth Yank boarded the ship on October 25, 1944. In total, 3.5 million men passed through Southampton during World War II. Queues of men and vehicles often stretched all the way from the camps on the common right down to the waterfront. In this photograph, dated 1945, we can see US Army vehicles queued in Western Esplanade, close to the wall. It became quite normal to have huge military vehicles parked outside your house. You can see how unfazed the lady is as she walks past. From oral histories, we know the Americans were popular in Southampton and were sometimes here several weeks before they embarked. The residents of Southampton allowed them into their homes to use their facilities, and when not on military duty, they entertained the children and enjoyed going to dances and films with the ladies. Dalton Newfield was a US Provost Marshal in the port. He was also a keen photographer and left behind a collection of photographs he took of the US Army in and around the city. The whole of Southampton became a military camp. All open spaces became camps and buildings were requisitioned for offices and billets. The US Army had offices in the Bargate and the Civic Centre, and officers were billeted in the Polygon and other hotels. The 14th Major Port Transportation Corps of the US Army were assigned to Southampton docks during the war to oversee the incoming lease-lend cargoes, and then to oversee the movement of troops and equipment. At the peak in November 1944, 6,500 US Army personnel were working in the docks. The American practice of segregation was upheld, with separate duties, billets, and recreational facilities provided for the men. At the end of the war, Southampton was responsible for the repatriation of troops back to America and Canada, followed by 70,000 British war brides and children who hoped to start new lives. Whilst they queued to embark, some Americans took the opportunity of adding their names and hometowns to a brick wall in Western Esplanade. This wall has become known as the D-Day or American Wall. From the wall, it was just a short walk or drive round to the embarkation hards at Town Quay or Mayflower Park. From the 5 hards in Southampton, ships would sail to Normandy and back in a continual shuttle service for the duration of the war. This 1946 aerial photograph shows the area around the wall. The wall formed part of the perimeter of a complex containing the town mortuary and disinfecting station, circled in yellow. The arrow shows the position of the wall that we are recording. The red circles show the position of a further section of perimeter wall closer to the waterfront and houses across the road. Both contained inscribed bricks and both have since been demolished. The houses across the road were demolished in 1973 and replaced with flats in 1981. This is the only photograph we have found of the carved bricks on the houses. Mr. Webb, a local resident, was the first person to recognise the significance of the bricks, and he petitioned for them to be rescued during the demolition of the houses. Mr. Webb traced 13 of the men and received letters back from 5. His files are being digitised as part of this project, and further research has been undertaken into the names he recorded. Walter Wells was one of the soldiers Mr. Webb traced. When his story was published in his local newspaper in Mississippi, he gave an insight into his carving. Walter admitted to scratching his name in bricks all over England, France and Germany during the war, as a form of camaraderie for other soldiers that would follow behind. In the 1980s, plans were approved for the demolition of the complex and building of the present hotel. With the knowledge of the importance of the inscribed bricks, a photographic survey was undertaken of the section of wall nearest the waterfront that was to be demolished. The other section, which contained a greater number of bricks, was allowed to remain as a memorial. Behind the wall in the hotel car park, a new section of wall was built to incorporate the best bricks rescued from the demolished wall and houses. A few are still kept by museums, and they too have been recorded as part of this project. More than 50 volunteers are involved in all aspects of the project, from recording the bricks to researching names online, researching in the archives and writing articles, and helping with education and outreach events. On recording days, volunteers have come along in a variety of weather conditions to study the wall brick by brick, taking detailed photographs and recording what they can see, sometimes using touch and torchlight to try to decipher the lettering. To date, we have recorded more than 60 inscriptions, many of which span several bricks. The inscription left by Lawrence Mathis, circled, takes up a full 11 bricks. Almost all of the inscriptions have now been deciphered, and the volunteers have successfully traced the names back to American servicemen using online military and genealogical records. The bricks were carved using an army knife. Some are very deep and detailed, indicating the soldier was here a while. Others are more hastily scratched. Usually the inscriptions include their first name, surname, hometown, and sometimes a date or other features such as an arrow, an anchor, or in Mayer's case, the outline of a landing craft. Each brick has a unique style, and sometimes it is the style of the handwriting evident in the carving that has confirmed identity when faced with multiple possibilities in the archive records. Dates are very helpful for identifying groups of names, and dates can identify useful documents. On 3 occasions, research into a name on the wall led to the discovery of a roster, and from these rosters, 3 different units of men have been identified, though undoubtedly other groups exist and many more military units are represented on the wall. The earliest known inscription belongs to Sidney Greenwald. Although the inscription is not dated, research has shown he landed in Normandy on D-Day +6, the 12th of June. This brick was saved from the demolished houses and is in the care of Southampton museums. Sidney, a Jewish Czechoslovakian immigrant living in New York, served as a combat engineer with General Patton's Third Army. One of the groups identified by a roster is the 106th Infantry Division, and more specifically 7 drivers from the 3rd Platoon. The 106th was the last division raised by the US Army. It was an all-draftee division with an average age of 20. Sergeant Ralph Weiss of the same 424 Regiment kept a diary. He tells us they sailed from New York on the 20th of October 1944 on the SS Aquitania, and they arrived in Scotland 6 days later. They were taken by train to Chipping Norton, where they were camped for a month. On the 2nd of December, they boarded trains for Southampton, arriving at 5 o'clock in the morning. They then had a 4-hour wait before boarding the ships that lay at anchor and waiting for the cover of darkness to sail. At dawn, they woke up off the French coast, but stormy conditions made it unsafe for the men to scramble down the cargo nets and into the smaller boats that would ferry them to shore. It was a whole 4 days before they could land. On reaching French shores, seasick, tired and hungry, they were then taken by truck on a cold, bumpy ride through France and into Belgium during the coldest winter on record. They arrived in the Ardennes on the 9th of December. The intention was to gather the division and acclimatise these inexperienced men in this quiet area. However, a week later, they were taken by surprise as Hitler launched what would be his last offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, which would rage on for 5 weeks, and the 106th were on the front line. To date, this is still America's biggest infantry battle, and both sides suffered huge losses. One of these 106 drivers was Delbert Smith. D.W. Smith, Miss, is quite clear to read on the wall. The volunteer researcher traced this back to Delbert Smith, 19 years old, working on the family farm in Itawamba, Mississippi. The 1940 census records Delbert living with his grandfather, parents, and 4 siblings on the family farm. The researcher also discovered Delbert had married his childhood sweetheart, Ethel Klaus, shortly after being drafted. A few ladies' names had been recorded on the wall, and another trip back revealed Wife Ethel, carved right in front of Delbert's own name. Contact with a relative through Ancestry produced a photo of Delbert in uniform with wife Ethel and daughter Nina, who had been born in 1942, shortly before Delbert enlisted in March 1943. On closer look, Dar Nina was also found inscribed. Clearly, Delbert had his family at the forefront of his mind as he stood at the wall, within sight of the ships that would carry them to France and whatever may lie ahead. Delbert survived the Battle of the Bulge and progressed through Europe with the Golden Lions. He returned home to Ethel and Nina in 1945, and together they had 3 more children. Sadly, Delbert died on their 64th wedding anniversary in 2005, aged 82, in Itawamba, Mississippi. Predictably, not all survived to return home. Bill Urban is one of 3 on the wall who were killed overseas. Sergeant Bill Urban from Chicago, serving with the 4th Armoured Division, was killed in the advance on the Rhine in March 1945. He is buried in the American Cemetery at Luxembourg. When our volunteer researcher made contact with the family and sent a photograph of the brick, the first response back was, "Today is Thanksgiving Day, and we, the Urban family, are saying thank you for this special gift." The same volunteer was in Luxembourg in December 2019 at the time of the 75th Battle of the Bulge commemorations, and was able to lay crosses at his grave on behalf of the family. A group of 9 names on the wall have been found on the passenger roster for landing craft LST 262, which left Southampton on Christmas Day 1944. They are identified as serving with the 449 Quartermaster's Gasoline Supply Company, a segregated unit of black Americans. These men have been much harder to trace in the records, though it shows most of them worked as hotel porters. James Henley is an excellent example of how it was his writing on his draft card that matched his carving on the wall, ruling out other possible candidates with the same name. An unexpected discovery was made during research into the brick carved by Cal Avery. His name and the initials MY for New York were clear to see, but no trace could be found of him in military records. In early March, we visited the wall and found the conditions for recording to be the best yet. Closer inspection of his brick revealed Amur, red, and cross symbol. Cowell was found to be a field director serving with the American Red Cross, a pastoral role not often recorded in World War II histories. All the results of this project, the brick recording, soldier stories and other Southampton World War II articles can be found on our website www.maritimearchaeologytrust.org/D-Day Walls. The photographs taken by volunteers during a photogrammetry survey have been used to create a 3D model. This model forms the focal point of our online interactive viewer, which links the bricks with the information gathered about each man. By selecting a name from the list, the model will zoom in on the inscription, and by navigating the tabs will display his story, together with all the information we have been able to gather: photographs, newspaper cuttings, military records, etc. The tabs will also include a close-up high-resolution image of the brick and a tracing of the graffiti. It is hoped this website will not only honour these men and preserve their stories, but also be of use to World War II researchers and people researching their family history all around the world. The website also contains a number of resources that can be freely downloaded. They include a project booklet that tells the story of the bricks and the men, an education pack with curriculum links and activities, a walking tour of World War II memorials in Southampton, and a self-guided wall visit and quiz sheet. A geocache has been located nearby to draw people to discover the wall. Education and outreach is an essential part of the project, disseminating the information we have gathered and raising awareness of this heritage. Prior to COVID, we were able to give a series of public talks and workshops for schools and youth groups, as well as a long-term exhibition in a hotel, a travelling exhibition toured venues in the city, and the Maritime bus attended public events. The project has generated much interest both here and in America and among World War II interest groups. A plaque will soon be installed to tell passers-by of its significance. There has been much concern that the inscriptions are eroding, but our surveys over the last 18 months have proven that their visibility is largely down to weather conditions. In strong sunlight, the inscriptions almost disappear. They are most visible when the wall is wet and the sky is overcast. Frost and the seasonal growth of moss can aid or hinder their visibility. The question of physical preservation is commonly raised. In Weymouth, the wall in the harbour was also similarly inscribed by the embarking Americans. A perspex sheet has been installed to protect the inscriptions, but unfortunately this makes it harder to read them, not only due to reflection on the surface, but also because the bricks are kept dry, making the inscriptions less visible. It requires maintenance to keep the surface clean and for the removal of rubbish dropped behind it. Some people have suggested the wall should be removed and rebuilt brick by brick in a museum. Again, this would mean the bricks are always dry and hard to read, and more importantly, it would be so far removed from its context that the viewer would have no sense of the trepidation felt by the men who stood there carving, within sight of the ships and the sea and the uncertain future that lie ahead. For now, with little significant erosion of the inscriptions evident, no immediate action is needed. Instead, we should continue to raise awareness of its importance as a heritage asset and to apply for listed status to ensure special protection. Thank you for listening. Please do remember to visit our website and find more stories about these men. And if you're ever in Southampton, go and visit the wall and see what names you can discover.
Thank you very much, Helen Wallbridge, for that wonderful account of the D-Day Wall project. It goes to show how one small area, a wall in the city, can actually reach out to the broader surroundings across the pond to the States and to the D-Day invasion in the Second World War. It links to all these people and it gives wonderful lessons from hindsight which can be fed into the education system today. Now I'm now going to pass you over to Jasmine Noble-Shelley, who will talk more about our outreach our dissemination program and our outreach, and how we work with various different components and elements of society to show how our past is relevant and to show what part the maritime cultural heritage plays in that relevance.
Hi, my name's Jasmine and I'm one of the education officers at the Maritime Archaeology Trust. Over the last 30 years, the Trust has put education and outreach at the forefront of everything we do. We've undertaken sessions with thousands of children and adults on a range of topics, from the depths of prehistory right through to the First and Second World Wars. Our education programme is varied and flexible, and we encourage people of all ages, backgrounds and abilities to engage with our shared heritage. Our approach is always to foster tangible connections through hands-on and interactive learning. There's just something about being able to hold a 600,000-year-old hand axe in your hand and imagine its journey, going from the hands that shaped it to being lost and sinking quietly into the earth where it waited for millennia. Through the rise and fall of empires, through natural disasters, through wars and revolutions, waiting for the moment it erodes out the cliffside and is picked up by a beachcomber or a dog walker. All that intangible history, concentrated in a bit of very real, very tangible stone, can help to capture imaginations and foster a lifelong respect and love for the past. When teaching school-age students, our sessions are designed to tie into the national curriculum and other frameworks, supporting key learning themes across many different subjects. We also help to train other educators in using archaeology in the classroom through CPD sessions and resources, and we also offer educational volunteering opportunities for those who really want to get stuck in. Maritime archaeology has so much to offer as a vehicle for learning beyond just historical facts. When we have physical traces of the past, it helps to support evidence-based learning and offers a primary source that speaks for itself rather than being filtered through secondary sources. It's also great for developing soft skills like critical thinking. Learning to question the historical record and recognising the difference between interpretation and fact is a key skill. Other activities that we run help to develop teamwork and creativity. For example, creating landing craft from scrap materials in teams as part of our D-Day Wall project. The soft skill development is often a welcome side effect to primary learning goals, which can stretch across and form links between different subjects. As an example, we could look at Roman trading, which can expand geographical knowledge, or learn how to measure and record sites, which puts math into practice. There are also many opportunities to incorporate creative writing, art, or even build in science and IT through 3D models and underwater robot building. It also allows us to tackle the big topics like climate change, the movement of people, or national identities in a real-world context, and it gives students this tangible evidence for these much larger concepts. Due to its breadth, maritime archaeology also lends itself well to all learning styles. For kinesthetic learners, being able to touch, hold, and maybe even smell archaeology can be the bridge they really need to get to grips with the subject matter. For the visual learners, there's everything from mapping of sites to projects which use historical paintings of the coastline to help understand climate change. For linguistic learners, there's of course plenty of reading and research to be done, or for those with an oral leaning, oral history and South Aid projects are also available. There's always something for everyone. We also find that archaeology can be a good way to engage students with special educational needs, because that tactile nature of archaeological material, or the way it lends itself to impressions described orally or in picture form, they can help those who find it difficult to engage in other ways. And of course, though we here at the Trust may be a bit biased on the matter, archaeology is just exciting. Whether it's that ancient hand axe, sunken shipwrecks, wartime tales of terror or valour, it's been capturing imaginations for many years. When we're motivated by that excitement, it becomes that much easier to take on and retain information, which, no matter the specific subject matter, always improves the learning process. Our outreach programme has been running a long time, and in that period, techniques and best practices have changed quite a lot. Across archaeology as a whole, technology has become more and more important, but that doesn't mean to say that more traditional techniques don't still have their place. One of our favourite low-tech activities is object handling, and we have an extensive collection of handling artefacts, including mini prehistoric flint tools, replicas of organic finds like hazelnuts, leather pouches and bones, and of course plenty of material from First and Second World War shipwrecks. When exploring the objects, we encourage users to ask questions of it as they hold it in their hands. What's it made out of and why? Why might it have this feature or that one? How old might it be, or what might it have been used for? This process draws out those critical thinking and investigative skills, actively engaging the brain rather than it just being in passive information receiving mode. It's also the perfect opportunity to create discussion by sharing ideas and pooling knowledge, and quite often by the end of a session, children are informing their parents of what they've learnt, so the knowledge is shared round. As well as handling real objects, being able to visit real sites is a great way to connect with the past. Although a lot of maritime archaeology sites are underwater, there are plenty in the intertidal zone or related sites on land that we can still visit. As Helen has already mentioned, recently we have facilitated visits to the Southampton D-Day wall. And during the visits, students could see for themselves the wall inscriptions, and when combined with the classroom activities, stories of the soldiers really came to life for them. We know that site visits or facilitated sessions aren't always practical, however, and for these occasions we've created lots of resources for you to use in the classroom or at home. We've got 3 activity boxes for sale. These are The Life of the Shipwreck, which looks at shipwreck from sinking to its discovery by archaeologists. And with this box, students can gain a basic understanding of ship parts and chronology, underwater preservation, and how archaeologists record shipwrecks. Then we've got the Shipwrecks Habitats box, which contains microscope and samples of marine creatures that can be found living on those shipwrecks around the UK. This one's a particularly good one for tying into science studies. And then finally we've got the Prehistory box, which encourages students to think about time depth and stratigraphy, and it gives an overview of historic climate change and mechanisms by which archaeological sites end up underwater. Each of the boxes comes with an activity guide, all the materials needed for the activities, and one of our timeline posters and some copies of our activity booklet. They're perfect for in-classroom activities or as follow-ups or precursors to some of our facilitated sessions. And you can find out more about these on our website. Also available online, we've got lots of worksheets and several educational packs available to download for free, covering a range of topics, so please do go to the website to check those out. In order to facilitate access to our online resources, we're in the process of developing a new website, which will be available towards the end of this month. Don't worry though, any current links, like the one on the previous slide, will get you to the right place when it finally goes live. The new website will make it even easier to find all of our resources, including those worksheet downloads, podcasts, videos, interactives, so watch this space. One of our other key resources, and one some of you may have seen out and about before, is our Discovery Bus. Originally developed in 2009, over the last decade the bus has visited schools and public events locally, nationally and internationally. It's been to France, Spain, the Netherlands and Cyprus, and it's seen thousands of people pass through its displays. On the bus we have information on current projects, handling artefacts, try-on dive kit and mini excavation, miniature versions of airlifts, touchscreen games, video screens and a microscope. And during public events we welcome everyone on board to explore, with our keen staff and volunteers on hand to answer questions. This year has seen the bus supporting the Shipwrecks project and visiting Weymouth Town Centre and the Chesil Beach Discovery Centre, as well as hosting the D-Day wall display. For schools and groups, we usually combine our Discovery Bus visits with a classroom session, but they are also available separately. Our standard sessions take the form of an introductory talk, followed by splitting a class in half, with half going out to explore the Discovery Bus and the other half staying in the classroom to explore the dive kit, and then they swap over halfway through. We've run lots of other forms of session though, and one of our specialities is bespoke sessions to your topic or local area. As an example, we've done a number of sessions where students create stop motion animations of the story of a shipwreck, or we go out into the field and we do a facilitated site visit. We've done sessions focusing on all the science that goes into archaeological investigation, art projects exploring historical graffiti, object handling, or on how to do good online research. This year, our sessions have been mostly focused on the D-Day Wall project, where we have worked with schools, home education groups, and the Young Archaeologists Club. Sessions kicked off with an introduction to World War II in Southampton and the project, and it was followed up by a visit to the wall. While there, students were challenged to answer a quiz, the answers to which were within the names on the wall. After that, back in the classroom, we then tasked them with building their own landing craft from scrap materials, which had to be capable of floating, carrying 10 Lego men, and had to have a working door or ramp. We had some fantastic landing craft built, and most of them even floated. The Young Archaeologists Club also got a chance to think about what mark they would have made on the wall, and then make and inscribe their own bricks out of clay. If you're interested in a session for your school or group, please do get in touch via our website. While I've been focusing on low-tech outreach so far, There are now exciting technologies that can enhance the way in which we engage with archaeology. You will have already seen in Brandon's talk how we have been and continue to be developing our 3D models of sites and artefacts, and how we offer them freely online. We can display these on the Discovery Bus too, and visitors can explore a shipwreck in 3D before getting to handle objects from wrecks just like it. We've also been developing virtual reality experiences. With a VR headset, you can explore a shipwreck just as it is on the seabed without even getting wet. If you've never tried VR before, it can be a bit strange at first, but once you get used to it, it's an incredible experience. You don't need an expensive headset to try the VR at home, just a smartphone and a Google Cardboard headset or something similar. And these are available really cheaply online. Once you've got those, you can go to our Sketchpad page, select the View in VR button, pop your phone in the headset, and away you go. With both the models and the VR experiences, we can add lots of extras, including photographs, sound, video, information overlays, and guided tours to make a really rich and fun learning experience. While we of course love to meet people in person for outreach, we also like to reach out virtually over social media, something that's been especially important this year, and that's been reflected in the unprecedented amount of engagement on our social media channels. If you're watching this, then you've already found our Facebook page, but we also have YouTube, where a video of these talks will be available, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Technology, like what I've described so far, has a huge potential to engage younger audiences with heritage, and the skills learnt within the field are highly transferable and widely used in other industries. One project that is bringing these skills to new audiences is our Waves of Change project. Launched last year, the first course of this project saw 6 young people join us for a 7-week course to help bridge the gap between education and employment, with an emphasis on those who are not currently following a path to higher education, or who would otherwise have easy access to skills training opportunities. During the course, participants, all aged between 16 and 25, learnt about and got hands-on with virtual reality, drones, diving, and creating their own 3D models with photogrammetry. Feedback from the first course was very positive. Participants were proud of their new skills, and they went away with the confidence to put them into practice in future. Unfortunately, we've been unable to run the course again this year so far, but we hope, present situation allowing, that we will be able to run the course again for a further 7 students in January 2021, and will update you at next year's AGM on how this goes. In the meantime, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you again at events and outreach sessions before too long.
Thank you, Jasmine, for presenting that raft of outputs that we have, including going out to schools, including taking the Maritime bus. We actually stretch on exhibitions. We tend to go all over the place. We go all over the world, and all over Europe at least. But what I'm going to take you to now is our Shipwreck Centre on the Isle of Wight. And Jackie Arnold, who is a manager there, is going to talk about the new displays that we had put in place over the summer, and also the challenges with COVID. The challenges that we've managed to overcome with careful management. But of course, it's had a big impact on us, an impact on the people we can show our exhibition to, and it's something that we hope will be past and will be behind us by next year.
The Shipwreck Centre and Maritime Museum was founded in 1978 by Martin Woodward. Originally located in Bembridge on the Isle of Wight, the museum moved in 2006 to larger premises at Arreton Barnes. It houses the thousands of items that Martin has recovered from the seabed. In addition to these, there are many other maritime items and an extensive collection of historic diving exhibits. In 2017, Martin made the decision to hand over the management of the museum to the Maritime Archaeology Trust. Since then, additional displays have been added to the collection, including a display of prehistoric stone tools on loan from Southampton City Council, and for the 2020 season, a much larger display of one of the Trust's most important sites, Boldner Cliff. Martin's assemblage of maritime items and the historic diving collection is what brings people back to the museum over and over again. However, adding these additional displays gives further opportunity to highlight the importance of our underwater heritage and ultimately allows us to explore the work of the Maritime Archaeology Trust, broadening the museum's appeal. There are many sites represented in the museum. We're going to take a moment to look at just a few. An 18th century vessel, the Henry Addington, was lost in 1798 when it ran aground on Bembridge Ledge and became stranded. The vessel was heavily salvaged over the following 2 years and almost everything of value was recovered. Martin located the wreck in 1980 and carried out excavations on the site. Items from these excavations are now displayed in the museum. We also have items from the A1. The A1 was the first British designed and built submarine. In 1904, whilst taking part in naval exercises off the Nab Tower, the vessel was involved in a collision with the Berwick Castle. The submarine failed to resurface and all 11 souls on board were lost. The A1 was raised a month later and returned to service. However, in 1910, a build-up of gases on board caused an explosion and 7 men were injured in the incident. The vessel was towed out of Portsmouth and sunk as a target. The A1 is now designated under the Protection of Wrecks Act 1973. There is an extensive collection of World War I vessels in the museum, including the SS Camberwell. This sank after hitting a mine off Dunnos Head on the Isle of Wight on the 18th of May 1917. Sadly, 7 people perished. Items from the Camberwell include binoculars and Indian rupees. Items such as these help us to tell the stories of the people connected with the ship. Another story to be found in the museum is that of the SS Mendi. The Mendi was carrying men from the South African Native Labour Corps to France to help Britain in the war effort. On the night of the 21st of February 1917, whilst en route to Le Havre in northern France, the Mendi was hit by the cargo ship Darrow. Over 600 members of the SNALC perished that night, along with more than 30 members of crew. Martin located the wreck site of the Mendi in 1974, and a collection of items are displayed in the museum. Alongside this display is information relating to the Hollybrook Memorial, which commemorates over 1,900 servicemen and women whose graves are unknown. The tragic story of the Mendi is now the subject of an education workshop designed to encourage students to explore Black, Asian and minority ethnic histories through maritime stories. The Mendi is a protected place under the Protection of Military Remains Act 1986. These examples demonstrate what a significant maritime archaeological collection this is, representing the range of wrecks in the waters off the Isle of Wight which have regional, national and international relevance. As you've seen from the photos, the museum also holds an extensive collection of historic diving equipment, including replica diving bells, a Lethbridge diving barrel used in the 17th and 18th centuries, and Sieber Gorman diving helmets. The Shipwreck Centre also holds a collection of more modern dive kit, most of which has been kindly donated to the museum. Towards the end of 2019, the Archaeology Discovery Centre at Fort Victoria unfortunately closed. This meant that many of the items on loan to the Discovery Centre from Martin, the museum and the Isle of Wight Heritage Service were to return to the Shipwreck Centre. One item requiring a new home was a 16th century minion from the Yarmouth Roads wreck, a site the Maritime Archaeology Trust had worked on with 4C Discovery, Forest Resources for Iberian Empires, Ecology and Globalisation in the Age of Discovery project, and the Solent Marine Heritage Assets project. The Yarmouth Road site was discovered in 1984 during an archaeological survey of the seabed off Yarmouth during the Isle of Wight Maritime Heritage project. Timbers from this site are believed to be those of a Spanish ship dating to the 16th century, possibly the Santa Lucia. Initially, only a few centimetres of timber were visible beneath the seabed, but not long afterwards, 3 pewter plates associated with the wreckage, dated to the 16th century, were also found. It was soon realised that this was an important site, and the wreck was designated as a protected wreck. This protected site is marked by a large yellow buoy visible east of Yarmouth Pier. The Trust are the current licensees. With such involvement in a site, it was essential that we could accommodate the minion in the museum. It was felt that the presence of the minion offered an opportunity to explain the important work of protecting wreck sites. To do this, we needed to rethink the museum layout and of course find a removal company ready to handle the not insignificant task of transporting a historic item weighing half a tonne across the island. Discussions with the Isle of Wight Heritage Service resulted in the loan of additional items from the Yarmouth Roads wreck site to accompany the minion. This is now a fantastic display of associated objects and is part of an eye-catching entrance to the museum. In addition to the minion, we also have a signal light, a diving bell returned to us from Hurst Castle, and a new prehistoric display incorporating Boldner Cliff. This includes new interpretation and showcases items highlighting the development of stone tools. There is video footage of divers working on site and a small clip summarising how the Boldner site developed. This display was produced with the support of the Hereford Shenton Trust. The museum has an extensive collection of various ship models, and for the opening of the 2019 season we decided to restore certain models and display in the education room. The restoration was largely carried out by our volunteers, but the concern was always the need to display them safely once work had been completed. For the opening of the 2020 season, it was decided to build a new cabinet to house these models. However, this is intended to be a flexible display option, and it is hoped that over time we can introduce additional items from Martin's collection which haven't yet found a place in the museum, and to also encourage temporary displays through collaboration. To accommodate certain items, the central section of the main gallery has also been reconfigured this year to allow objects previously overlooked to now be seen. New lighting in the main gallery has been installed, which has improved the visitor experience. This was kindly donated by Chris Landre and the Scorpion Charitable Trust. To develop the museum, it is essential that we do introduce new elements to showcase the work of the Maritime Archaeology Trust, whilst maintaining the original ethos of the museum that Martin designed. We have many repeat visitors to the museum, and incorporating new items into the collection is vital in retaining their interest. The museum shop has changed this year, with new options for presentation made possible by new storage facilities throughout the museum. The shop continues to sell items with a maritime theme, including items with specific relevance to the museum. A colour change throughout the shop refreshed and brightened its appearance. This change continued into some of the museum galleries. The museum was due to open as normal at the end of March 2020. However, the opening was postponed until August 2020 due to the pandemic. We were fortunate to receive support from the South East Museum Development Programme in the form of grants, which assisted with the purchase of some of the measures the museum needed to open safely, and which have now become commonplace in day-to-day life. The wearing of masks, use of hand sanitisers, protective screens, one-way routes, and of course social distancing are all now in place throughout the museum. Alongside this, it was decided collectively that the museum would reduce opening hours, welcoming visitors who had booked either online or via email or phone. This allowed us to manage the opening more easily without having to resort to some of the more unmanageable measures. Our volunteers have provided valuable support during these very difficult times. Children's activities have always been on offer at the museum, and this is still the case. However, all have been adapted to reflect the necessary changes. We have also tried to incorporate all the new displays into the activities where possible. All of these are offered free of charge to those with tickets to the museum. Certain displays had been planned for the education room this year, however these were not able to go ahead. To ensure that our visitors still benefited from these, we decided to build the displays into the main gallery on one of the closed-off staircases. One of these displays was the letters relating to the loss of the SS Eleanor during World War I. The ship was lost and only Barton Hunter survived. His uniform, kindly donated by Barton's daughter, Mrs. Jean Rudden, and the letters he received from grieving relatives was planned to be an interactive display in which visitors could choose to listen to those letters being read aloud. Unfortunately, certain elements of this could not proceed due to advised safety measures. Throughout 2019 and early 2020, with the support of the Foyle Foundation and the Isle of Wight Museum and Schools programme, funded by the Arts Council, the Shipwreck Centre has developed 8 curriculum-linked education workshops for primary schools, which encourages engagement and learning in heritage settings. The education sessions on offer at the museum include underwater prehistory, focusing on Boldner Cliff and what we can learn from an archaeological site, through to one for our older students, the art of the museum, where the class will practice photographing and recording items from the collection and use these to explore selected themes. One of our newest sessions is Antarctic Explorers. In this, we use images to discover how life for Shackleton and Scott may have been on board their respective ships. This one works particularly well when we have slightly colder temperatures in the museum, with full classes dressed up as Antarctic explorers. As a legacy from our Forgotten Wrecks of the First World War project, we have introduced a session focusing on World War I wrecks around the Isle of Wight. This allows us to combine the information learnt from the 4-year project with the items in the collection. Students discuss the stories behind the vessels and use these to imagine what life on board a ship in wartime would have involved. We also use the collection to help us understand how selected items can help us to tell the stories of the people on board. We are currently developing a World War II workshop to explore similar themes. In our History of Diving session, we encourage the children to compare the historic dive equipment against modern dive kit and to explore how things have changed and why. Our Titanic session includes the story of the loss, however does move away from this slightly and looks more at what happens to a wreck under the water, using this famous wreck as an example. We also incorporate examples from the museum collection into this session where possible. Our most popular workshop is Maritime Archaeology. In this, the children learn the science behind diving by examining dive kit and archaeological equipment and identifying the similarities and the differences between land and underwater archaeology. We also explore the process of wreck formation. This is a fantastic way of introducing science in a way that is both engaging and fun to our younger audiences. All sessions have been designed to be adaptable to all the primary key stages and are tailored to the needs of each individual school. Through Museum and Schools, we have also acquired several items to assist us with the introduction of sensory elements to the sessions, and these will be introduced when circumstances allow. For secondary schools, the involvement with the museum tends to be more focused towards career choices and ongoing workplace skills learning, with participation at events such as the Noel Turner Science Festival held at Cowes Enterprise College early in 2020. We hope to be able to engage more with secondary schools in the future. School visits were booked in for the early part of the year, with more arranged. Unfortunately, the later sessions were cancelled in line with COVID restrictions. However, we stayed in touch with schools throughout this period and gave support to teachers on topics where necessary through email or virtual discussions. In addition to this, the Maritime Archaeology Trust devised a host of online resources. When the time came to think about how schools would work post-lockdown, it became evident that there was a need for virtual sessions to be available. With support by the Museum and Schools programme, we now have a virtual session ready to go, along with the appropriate resources and an online tour specifically to accompany these sessions. In addition to this, sessions have been developed to be safely delivered in schools, and amendments have been made to those offered in the museum to ensure that teachers have confidence in the measures that we have taken. Again, the Museum and Schools programme has been vital in assisting with this work, and schools will continue to be offered subsidised sessions until March 2021. An important part of securing the museum's future is to continue to raise awareness. Also essential to any museum success is collaborative working. We are currently active members in the Isle of Wight Cultural Education Partnership, the Museum Forum, and of course the Museums and Schools project. This has brought us closer together with other heritage professionals across the island and offers many possibilities for future collaborations. We also look to increase the awareness of the museum through event attendance, and in early 2020 joined other museums and organisations at science fairs and business workshops. We will continue our engagement with these and participate in virtual ways or face-to-face when conditions allow. With regards to projects, we have successfully secured funding through the National Lottery Heritage Fund to enhance the submarine interpretation and displays throughout the museum. This will include the previously mentioned A1 submarine and German U-boat artefacts that currently make up part of the collection. We have also secured funding from the South East Museum Development Programme to update the Shipwreck Centre website to include more features, and also to trial an introduction of augmented reality on one of the displays in the museum. Augmented reality, or AR, is an interactive experience built onto a real-world environment. For example, we may hold an electronic tablet or phone in front of an item from the Boldner Cliff collection, and this could then display a 3D image of the platform recently discovered, or may show the divers working on site. We are hoping that AR may also encourage secondary schools to engage with the museum collection through the use and development of technology. I do hope that this presentation has shown that although the 2020 season has been one of the most challenging to date, plans for the museum to develop and thrive continue to be developed. Next year we hope to open stronger than ever. Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for presenting our main outlooking facility, our fixed exhibition on the Isle of Wight. And what with Jasmine's talk, we can see how we reach out into society. We reach out to the general public. We're trying to demonstrate to people everything we do by visualizing it, bringing it to the surface and presenting it online and through other mediums more directly. But we also have another role, and that is to inform the managers. That is to inform the people who work on the seabed, laying cables, building wind farms. We have to try and inform them and help them understand what they're going to encounter and what that cultural heritage might be and what it really means and how we should then manage it. That's been very difficult with COVID, of course, so we've started to do more courses online, and this is a route that we tend to take, or we plan to take in the future. And Christin Heamagi is going to tell us more about it and how we reach out to those offshore developers and managers in the next 10 or 15 minutes.
Hi, my name is Christin Heamagi, and I work as a maritime archaeologist at Maritime Archaeology Trust and our commercial arm, Maritime Archaeology. While you are familiar with the background of the Maritime Archaeology Trust, you might not know that Maritime Archaeology Limited was set up in 2003 as a non-profit commercial subsidy to the Trust. Since the start in the early noughties, we've been working on a wide scale of offshore developments, and over the last 10 years, our focus has been very much on the offshore renewables industry. Today, I will be talking about how we've used our experience of education and outreach by working with the public and bringing that into the commercial field and developing training sessions relevant to personnel in the offshore industry ahead of offshore works. The data collected, for example, by underwater remote vehicles, ROV, or offshore boreholes can and should be used by archaeologists in the environmental process, not only to mitigate the impact on underwater cultural heritage, but also to contribute to a greater understanding of our maritime past. Before the COVID-19 limitations on travel, I used to make my way either to the offices of the developer of an offshore contractor or to the vessel before sailing to ensure that the right personnel would be available. This map shows my work-related travel in the busy year of 2019. The presentation and training that I provide is always project-specific and tailored to the type of offshore works the crew is about to undertake. I would normally start with going back to basics and get the participants involved talking about archaeology and shipwrecks. I draw on recent research and I present past projects as examples. But I also need to ensure that the personnel are aware of the legal requirements set out in the Marine Plan by the Receiver of Wrecks under the Merchant Shipping Act of 1995 and the recommendations outlined by UNESCO. Archaeology isn't always the most engaging subject to talk about, especially when the audience perceive that I will either tell them about old dusty things, stop them from doing their work, or even worse, add more tasks to their heavy workload. Being aware and breaking down those perceived barriers is therefore very important to keep the audience engaged and ensure that following the presentation, the important points have registered with the crew. I've also learned from other presentations, as I often undertake my talk just ahead of the Unexploded Ordnance UXO safety presentation, where I've noticed that the interest is slightly higher from some participants. I toyed with the idea of adding more things that go bang to my presentation. But instead, I settled for some jokes on the first Brexit when talking about Holocene sea level change, and mentioning Tinder when the C14 dating slide is on the screen. But to really ensure that I capture people's interest, I make sure that I mix the important but maybe less interesting parts with stories, stories of shipwrecks, stories of archaeological discoveries, and stories of people. While traveling is not an option at the moment, we have continued the communication with offshore staff by a combination of videos, which are shown to the relevant staff on board, as well as live sessions with offshore management. The jokes and direct engagement levels have dropped, as it's hard to know if anyone is really listening, especially when everyone on the call is on mute, and it really feels like you're talking to yourself while they are all Instagramming pictures of their favorite cats. But saying that, some of the best feedback we've ever had has been from clients who've seen the video that we provide them with and gone through the presentation online. We've also noticed an increase in data of archaeological potential from the offshore vessels. I would therefore like to share with you some of the exciting artifacts that this training scheme and the following archaeological assessments have helped discover, record, and preserve. The first object is an anchor found on the seabed, and here represented in a 3D model. Sometimes you're lucky enough to find small objects. This is a ship's fastening found on the seabed. And the last object I would like to share with you is a 19th century bottle. So to summarize, the challenges of 2020 have so far taught us that despite missing the 2-star comfortable hotel at Clacton-on-Sea, being pushed to develop our methods and ways of communication is not bad at all. So thank you for listening, and see you all through a screen very soon.
Thank you very much, Christin. We now know and we can see that our underwater cultural heritage is safe in our hands, or your hands at least. But now we're going to go full circle and we're going to go back and we'll start looking more at research, which is the foundation, the core of the work that we do. And Julie Satchell, the head of research, is going to talk about digital visualization or digital tools that are used to help enhance our understanding of this underwater cultural heritage, and also how we can share that with cultural heritage managers as well as the people on the broader scale. So at this point, I'll hand over to the last speaker, Julie Satchell.
Hi, I'm Julie Satchell and I'm the Head of Research at the Maritime Archaeology Trust. Today I'm going to be showcasing some of the ways that our interactive digital resources, viewers and visualisations can be accessed and interrogated for a range of different research. So whether you have a general interest in a topic or a theme, or if you want to undertake more targeted queries, the power of these digital resources is really beginning to revolutionise how it's possible to access and analyse this data. And I'm going to give you just a few examples of those today. With 2020 being a year when we've all spent more time at our computers than ever, it has provided opportunities to explore the many and varied digital resources that are increasingly available online. Here we see just some of the interactives that are available through our website. These pages have been particularly popular during lockdown, and I encourage you to try and take a look at them at your leisure. These resources have been produced associated with various projects over the last 15 years. They show increasing complexity and sophistication as the technology, digital capability and software has developed. Some of the interactives that I'll feature are circled in red. They include examples that focus on single sites, where we've been making a wide range of archive material available, through to viewers, which bring together large multi-site collections, often across multiple countries. Our goal always being to try and make sites and data as accessible and available as possible for everyone in formats that are engaging and enjoyable. Taking a look at two major projects on backlog archives from designated protected wreck sites, we start with our first large-scale digitisation project, which was on the site of the Invincible. It had at its core the archive produced during the initial excavations undertaken in the 1980s. It brought together material held by John Bingaman and John Broomhead from the original excavation team, with other available resources and associated collection. This two-decked 74-gun ship started life as a French warship in 1744. It was captured and recommissioned into the English Navy, where it was the flagship of three admirals, took part in two wars against the French, and served as far afield as the West Indies and Nova Scotia. Invincible ended its career in 1758 when it grounded in the Solent and was wrecked. The archive digitisation project was delivered in 2008 and 2009. It involved an extensive scanning programme which included over 1,100 dive logs, many drawn plans, photographs, slides, research notes and project correspondence. Further archive enhancement included working with the Chatham Dockyard Trust to photograph their full artefact collection, including material that wasn't on display. Here we see the online viewer, which makes all this archive available. It uses MapGuide, which is an open source WebGIS interface, and it allows a visualized version of the database to be explored. The site's introduced with a site plan, which forms the main graphic element, and over this the ship's plans are initially shown, so the relationship of the seabed remains to the original form of the ship can be viewed. By zooming into specific areas, you can see the types of artefacts excavated, and you can click to access more detailed information on these or associated dive logs. Layers can be turned on and off using the toolbar on the left to allow certain types of archive or artefact to be seen. This was an early example of an approach to making a legacy archive, which was in private ownership, publicly available. And the work on this project helped us develop approaches that were to be applied to the audit and assessment of another protected wreck site, that of the Stirling Castle. The Stirling Castle was a third-rate ship, which was one of 30 ships of the line built as part of Samuel Pepys' shipbuilding programme. It was launched in 1679 and would be wrecked in the Great Storm of 1703 on the Goodwin Sands off Kent. When it was discovered in 1979, the remains of this ship were in a remarkable state of preservation. A programme of investigation was undertaken with the support of the then Trust for Thanet Archaeology, and that resulted in a large collection of recovered artefacts. Subsequent work on the site by a number of local groups and organisations, as well as by the Archaeological Diving Unit, had left a large and dispersed archive which consisted of paper, image, artefact, drawn, video and digital material, which was held by museums, trusts, contractors, heritage agencies and private individuals. For over 10 years, the Trust has been working with groups and specialists to deliver a programme of archive and assessment and analysis that I'm pleased to say has been published earlier this year as Volume 4 in our monograph series. This volume provides in-depth information on the archaeological work on the site, the history of the ship and the collection. However, today I'm going to highlight the digital archiving element of this project. The work undertaken included producing a database of known site archive which summarised the content and where it was held. The project did not include a large scanning or digitisation element, but it did involve photographing the artefacts from the site, which are held in a range of different locations. A resulting output is a digital archive that has been deposited with the Archaeology Data Service, and that includes a copy of the project database and photographs of most of the recovered artefacts. Having this digital archive available online means that anyone interested in late 17th and early 18th century artefacts from shipwrecks can instantly access this information. It's helping direct comparison with other shipwrecks and integration with wider research. An example of comparative collections comes from the London shipwreck, lost in the Thames in 1665. Specialist analysis of brass navigational dividers from the site has revealed their composition is exactly the same as some of the examples from the Stirling Castle. Comparison of artefacts between these two securely dated shipwrecks is also feeding into much wider research programmes on the development of metal alloys over time, demonstrating the value of wreck collections far beyond maritime archaeology. Increasing availability of shipwreck artefact databases is making the task of comparative research between international sites much easier. This, combined with programmes to digitise backlog archives, is making maritime archaeological data much more accessible and is stimulating new research. I'm now going to move from a focus on large archives from individual wreck sites to look at a number of resources that make data available on multiple sites in ever more complex ways. The Archaeological Atlas of the Two Seas project ran between 2009 and 2012. We worked with partners in France and Belgium to bring together information about archaeological sites that lie beneath the channel. This included wreck and foreshore sites which spanned from the prehistoric through to modern periods. To do this required the development of new approaches to be able to view comparative data sets from different countries. The result was our first geoportal. It brought together complex data sets from multiple sources into a single interface. The design of the geoportal required a range of issues to be explored related to the comparison and integration of different national heritage databases, the types of data they recorded, fields required, language and terminology. The output is the geoportal, which is available in 3 languages. It allows you to search on individual sites by clicking the dots, or you can take a text search approach and search by site name, time periods or keywords. Just one example shown here is the Caduceus in the Eastern Solent, where basic information is revealed through the initial text pop-up window, with more detailed information, including photographs of recoveries from the site, also linked. Experience with the A2S geoportal was drawn on when developing approaches to another complex set of data for the Arch-Monch project. The full title of the project is Archaeology, Art and Coastal Heritage, Tools to Support Coastal Management and Climate Change Planning across the Channel Regional Sea. As this suggests, the data involved in the project included paleoenvironmental material, archaeology, historic sites and documents, artworks, historic photographs and postcards, maps and charts. This project involved working with partners in France, Belgium and the Netherlands, with each country having various data sources and collections available for inclusion in analysis. The Aegea portal, which we see here, draws on a project database. It provides a public interface with the data to help understand historic changes to the coastline. It enables anyone to see a spatial view of coastal change using the data sources that were ranked to determine their potential in relation to how they could demonstrate these changes. This is reflected in the size and colour of the related map icons. So we have some examples here. They show the detail of the study area in the western Solent and across the western end of the Isle of Wight. Our evidence is indicated with blue squares. Clicking on the example here brings up a detailed engraving with information available on its date, the artist and its scoring. The circles indicate archaeological or paleoenvironmental sites, and here we see the HMS Pomone, which wrecked on the Needles in 1811. And you can see how the geoportal can link out to other online resources to provide more detail. This geoportal really demonstrated the potential of integrating multiple data sites and types into a single online interface, and the experience of delivering it was vital to creating what is our most extensive online resource so far, the Forgotten Wrecks Interactive. The interactive viewer was a key output from our Forgotten Wrecks of the First World War project that investigated the vital yet little known struggle that took place on a daily basis off the south coast of Britain. The viewer brings together a wide range of information and resources related to over 1,100 wrecks and sites from the First World War. The many shipwrecks investigated reflect the diversity and magnitude of vessels lost in the conflict. Among them are ocean liners, merchant vessels and fishing trawlers, seaplane lighters, airships, submarines, troop and hospital ships. There are examples of naval and commercial ships powered by steam and sail. The viewer is a good example of how, although the formal project has been completed, the online resource continues to be added to and kept live. We have volunteers who became particularly engaged with the project and are following up research on individual vessels or themes. Divers are also continuing to provide photographs of sites on the seabed, which are added to the dataset and made available. We're now going to look at a few ways that you can interrogate and use the viewer. Initially, we're going to look at the map search zoom function, where you can go with increasing detail into different areas of the map. The wreck names become available as you get closer in. This time we're going to go to the John Mitchell, a steam drifter lost here off the southwest coast of the Isle of Wight. From the initial pop-up box, you can see in the right-hand panel there's a range of information available. Statistics and details of the site, more detailed text on the seabed remains, information about how the vessel was lost, and here we have photographs of the seabed site, and you can click through the gallery here to see what's available, and there's also some historic images of this vessel available as well. The next icon shows you artifacts that have been recovered from the site, and again it's the similar way of clicking through on the gallery feature and finding out more information about them. This site, along with about 60 others, have detailed archaeological reports available for them. Again, all linked in through the viewer. This pops up into a new window so you can look at the full report in more detail. We also have videos available for this site. For the John Mitchell, there are multiple videos available that you can see here. You can view them through the pane and watch them with the viewer active, or you can have them in full screen mode and watch them as a larger option. And finally, this site also has a 3D model available. This does take slightly longer to load within the window, and again you can choose to see that as it's shown here or open that up into a full screen window. I hope you can see that how much this is an innovative way of making a really wide range of information and archive from sites available via a single interface. Now we'll take a look at some of the various search options that make the viewer such a powerful tool for research. From the left-hand panel here, it's possible to undertake a wide range of different searches. This time looking at the vessel type that you can search on, and the choice here to look at all the destroyers that we have in the data set. Again, you can start looking at the patterning of these losses within the wider South Coast area. It's then possible to clear all your search filters and choose to search on another option. Here we're looking at choosing all the Norwegian flagged vessels in the data set. A rather large number of flagged vessels from Norway, around 10% of the data set. They did, at the time of the First World War, have the 4th largest commercial fleet in the world, which is reflected obviously in these losses. Looking at sites by the types of resources that are available within the viewer, here we've chosen the option to see sites with photographs of seabed remains attached to them, and we're having a look at an example off the southeast coast of the Isle of Wight, here going into a cluster of commercial trading wrecks that were lost in this area, and this one is the Camberwell. I mentioned that we've searched for seabed images, and you can see here back to the gallery feature where we can click through and have a look at those that are available. There's options to mix those sliders for different resources, so you can look at those with multiple types available at the same time as well. Moving in and out of the data window here allows you to see the full distribution of sites, or to look in more detail at one area. We're now going into looking at cause of loss and those sites that were torpedoed, really widespread across the area, showing the impact particularly that the submarines had on losses during the war. The use at time of loss option, here we're looking at minesweepers. Again, you can begin to look at patterning within that data set. A cluster here around the east coast, an area that was obviously heavily mined, very active during the war, and inevitably that's been reflected in the vessels lost here. Clearing our search options again, we're going to have a look at the options for the time slider feature. So here, being able to see sites that were lost in 1915, a relatively small number within the large data set. You can then move this along to see other years. 1917, a year of very large losses, reflecting the period of unrestricted submarine warfare. So hopefully you can see how you can start asking lots of different questions of the data and what this is contained in there. Finally, we're going to have a look at how we can use the viewer to use multiple search options to look at different queries of the data. So here we're going to choose all the steamships in the data. We're also going to choose those that have geophysical or acoustic images available for them. We want to look at cargo vessels, so this will be steam cargo vessels, so we're choosing the commercial option, and we want to look at all of those that were lost in 1915. This brings up a relatively small number of sites, many over towards the east coast. We're going to look at some examples. I've chosen ones that are actually of a similar size. This one, the Seven Seas, and here's one of the amazing high resolution geophysical survey images available. You're able to click on these to open a larger window, and you can see this is a really very well preserved site. Not far away from that on the seabed, the site of the western coast, as I mentioned, so this was lost at a similar time, 1915, and was a similar sized vessel, but the seabed remains not so intact as the one very close by. So you can start looking at questions about how these sites are degrading over time, how the metal is beginning to break down, and also questions about how these might have been impacted post-loss that's impacted these remains. A comparative site here, again, much more buried, different environment, so you can look at how the environment of the wrecks might have impacted the remains over time. So this is really just one of a myriad of possible research questions that can be posed of the data set, and we're really looking forward to seeing how people begin to use this in the future. Looking to the future, we're excited for the possibilities that digital datasets, viewers and interactives can bring to understanding and promoting maritime archaeological sites. The ability to put a single site in its wider context, regionally, nationally and internationally, will become increasingly more rapid. The potential for displaying results of complex searches with interconnected datasets is likely to revolutionise the types of research possible. Exploring these connections will tell new stories and also help re-examine old ones. Digital interactives are enabling maritime archaeology to be experienced in new ways. Increasing public involvement from creation of resources through to dissemination provides a seemingly endless possibilities for heritage to be enjoyed by all. We are certainly looking forward to exploring that journey with you in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Julie. That sort of rounds up all our talks, but I think looking back at them, we've covered an awful lot of ground. I mean, we can go back in time. We can start thinking about maybe the value of understanding the cultural heritage, and in particular, the maritime cultural heritage and that which is underwater. We just got to take it back to the first people that turned up in the UK, the people that migrated from the south and the east. 10, 8, 6,000 years ago, they walked on the lands. They brought with them culture, they brought language. They sort of set the foundations for who we are. When the tide came up, or the sea level came up, let's say, sea level came up, people turned to boats. People then were able to move further afield and quicker. So more people came to the UK, then more people went from the UK. And there was then an interaction, as there is more so today, between migration and immigration and migration. There's people coming from all around the world, travelling on the seas to get here and to colonise and disperse this planet. And what they've left behind, or what we find in these submerged maritime areas, are signatures of the past, memories of the past, artefacts that often don't survive well on land, and they tell us that story. If we look at the way where people came from, we can understand how those cultures developed. That gives us a commonality, that gives us connection, that shows us who we are and why we have a sort of a common background. And then we can look at the sort of globalization aspects. We can look at the more recent history, ships and vessels, and the loss of those vessels. And each one has a more resonant story, because those people might be our relatives. We might know more about them. We can empathize with them more. We can learn about them. We can understand their loss, and we can learn lessons from the past. Many shipwrecks have happened when they shouldn't have happened. That shouldn't happen again through war, engineering folly, whatever it would be. There's lessons from the past we can learn. So it's a very valuable resource. We also see this heritage as markers on the seabed. Every shipwreck, every submerged structure is datable. It's a reference point for what happened, what the environment was like at the point that it sank. You got shipwreck, may have gone down 300 years ago. We can understand how the sea level has changed around it, the landscape's changed relative to it. So we can monitor those change as the climate changes with it. They're also artificial reefs. They're sites that get covered in fish. They might be an old European wreck that ends up on the south coast of Africa. Now it becomes part of that local industry, part of the local heritage, and it has stories to tell all around the world. The value goes beyond just the study of shipwrecks for their own sake. It disseminates, or it permeates throughout society. And this is the direction that we need to go in the future, particularly with changes in the ocean, changes in the climate, and how we can use these tools to help teach people about the past, to support ocean literacy, to use these relics, use these stories to show people how the world is changing around us. And this feeds in nicely into the UN Decade of Sustainable Development, this UN Decade of Oceans and Sustainable Development, should I say, and this is starting next year. This is an area that we would like to contribute with our understanding of the sea, not just of the shipwrecks and not just of the submerged landscapes, but how they contribute to our understanding of the planet. But all this would be nothing without education, without visualization, and without dissemination. And you've seen today how we're approaching that subject. You're seeing how our strategy is taking us down a road where we can grab that information, we can look at the research, we can turn it to things that really matter, not just to archaeologists, but to people, and we're looking at tools and ways of getting that information out there. Getting that information out not just to heritage managers, not just to enthusiasts of maritime archaeology, out there to everyone through these platforms and through the web, and hopefully around most of the world. Thank you. But do bear with us, because you'll shortly be getting a new notification for a fresh live stream, which is where you can start asking questions and I'll try and answer them in the next few minutes. And also, before we go, I have to draw your attention to our wonderful sponsors who support us and keep us going. That's because we're a charity. We don't get any statutory support. We try and save the world all by ourselves as a small organisation. And that's where you can also help save the world as well. You can help by joining in as volunteers, and I have to thank all the wonderful volunteers who contributed so much. You can be one of those as well, but if you don't want to volunteer, we're quite happy to receive financial support. So do go ahead, support the Trust, but don't just support the Trust, support the understanding of the past within which we can help educate and benefit the future. Thank you. Hello audience, thanks for watching, thanks very much for tuning in and staying with us. I do apologise about that glitch in the middle. We did have a bunch of gremlins and they got in the way and they did cause us a bit of problem, but all the talks are going to be back online later today, and I believe there will be a feed sent out to you so you can get to the whole thing and see all the talks in one cohesive slot for about 2.5 hours. So nothing's been lost, just apologies for the hiccup. And it'll go online, go on YouTube next week, and then everyone can see it ad infinitum. But in front of me, I do have a few questions have come in, which I will attempt to answer. So, what do we got first of all? What do you think will be your biggest challenge in the coming year? Oh, bit of a tricky one. Well, next year is going to be a battle. It's going to be a battle because of COVID, because of people's concerns and thoughts are going to be about now and how they're going to deal with the trials and tribulations of life with COVID. And we respect that fully. And all we can do is try and make people aware, remind people that those historic assets that are there that could be lost, they need to be conserved, they need to be protected, because they do form a foundation, as I said before, a foundation for us, and they can give us long-term benefits that you might not notice in the short term, but in the long term they give you a sense of space, a sense of place, and gives you a sense of security that really is good for mental health and well-being. So I think we should just continue, and one of the main things we've got to do is really push out or develop these, get better at it, I suppose, get rid of these gremlins, but get better at sort of promoting the technology and the visualization tools, etc. that you saw earlier, particularly with things like the presentations by Brandon, was Jackie and Jasmine as well, all about promotion, as well as the analysis, of course, that Julie was talking about. That's something different, but really we've just got to get the images up there, get it out there, and make people excited, get them to engage. So what else do we have here? One is, do you offer talks for adults? Yes, we do. We do. I suppose one just needs to contact the Trust at our Maritime Archaeology Trust at info, or go onto our website. I'm sure you're all much more au fait with web technology than me, so I'm sure you could find us. And then put in queries and ask, and we do come out and give presentations. We try and link them with projects like the D-Day War project, for instance, which is all welcome to come and give talks where we can. What else do we have here? What's your favourite find from Bolton Cliff? Oh, well, that's a difficult one. From Bolton Cliff, we have found so much. We've got these wonderful flint tools, but I think for me it was a little bit of string. You know, it's just 10 centimetres long, and it means so much because we know nothing much about these Mesolithic Stone Age people, but suddenly we're finding all this woodwork, all the worked wood, the woodworking activity, and things like string, which can bind it all together to make these much bigger, much more composite artifacts. And so really, you know, we have the Stone Age, but it should be called the Wood Age, really. And when we're finding these sort of special artifacts that really give us an insight into the life of the people, that's something quite special. Right, something else, a bit more. What was the name of the vessel of the title slide for the talks? This was a gallia. This went down in 1917, and it was presented by Brandon as well within his 3D visualization. Oh, how large is she and how long did it take to create the image? The site, I remember that now, was about 100 meters long, about 100 meters long, just over, and the images were collected, that 3D model, the images were collected in 2 dives, each of about 40 minutes. That was all it took. We did have 40 meters visibility at the time, so it's quite lucky. But we did that quite quickly, quite effectively. That was quite a good dive. Right, anything else here? It's all gone. Okay, yes, but there is an issue, of course. I say the Garry have just been picked up on by a few things about Garry. Yeah, it was about 100 meters long. But it took, once we actually gathered all the images, and there were about 2,000 pictures, but it took about 8 days to process. So quite a lot of work to actually, once you've got it, gathering the data didn't take so long, but actually turning the data into model took an awful lot longer. Right then, I think that's about it. I can't see any more coming through at the moment, but we're welcome to receive more questions or queries if you have them. Just send them through. Could they be sent through on this link, or no, send them through to the Queries to the Trust, and we'll, technology beats me, send them through Queries to the Trust, and we'll try and answer anything we can. But on that note, I should thank you all for watching. It's been great, it's been exciting, and a little bit stressful at times with everything going wrong, but it will get back on track, and hopefully we'll be promoting these talks to anyone that bears to watch them. Okay.
I'll just read this one out. We have one more question.
Oh, we have one more question.
From Sarah Rich, which says, I received a message that investigations of worked wood at Kew revealed that they were just bark. Do you have any further information about this, especially given the increasing amounts of worked wood?
Yes, that's an interesting question. I'll try not to give too long an answer, but they are worked wood and bark. That's what they appear to be, and we found, of course, another 60 odd pieces recently. You can see the bark attached to the sapwood as well. So it's all the edge of the tree that's been trimmed and split apart, and that's an offcut or offshoots, I think, as Sarah knows quite well, from the woodworking activity when you're stripping a big oak tree. Those are the sort of, say, the offcuts that you come out with. Those stretches about 30, 40, 50 centimetres long, and this is what we're finding all the bark. So we now can see them all as bark, and all this sort of product of actually trimming a big, or converting a big oak tree into whether it's a log boat or not. And all these bits are then being just reused all over the site and laid down, would appear to be on soft spots. They tend to be next to channels as well, maybe water channels, and used as sort of platforms or surfaces. So the story's starting to come together now, and it's all linking around the central feature of trimming that big oak tree. Okay, so I think that might be it, and I'm welcome to discuss these matters further with people, particularly Bolton Cliff with Sarah. That would be interesting to talk about, to bring her up to speed in the coming days or months. Okay, thank you very much. All good.